Shaun, welcome back to the ABC.
How fucking dare you? Aren't I entitled to a private life?
Afraid not.
Okay. That's probably a bit early for that, isn't it?
For the swearing?
Well, for everything. For me being offended, I was about to walk out. Just for the promo.
We're only allowed one F word per show, so you've already...
That's okay. I don't work blue.
Okay.
So that's absolutely fine.
As you can see, nothing's changed since you left.
I like that, because I thought that looked familiar.
That's a bit on the nose, don't you think?
Well, it's not. You're not really dealing with 16... You don't talk 16mm films?
No,
is that a 16mm projector?
We never project any clips on the show. It's kind of makes people just say you're copying the movie show. That's what...
I haven't made any films.
Well, hang on. You've been in... What was that film you were in called Aquamarine?
That's a lovely story. That's about a young girl who is a mermaid, and it's the story of all mermaids, really. She wants to fall in love and she wants to walk the earth.
Do you have things like that are on your resume that maybe people don't know about but have a special place for you?
I was Humphrey B. Bear.
In what?
On stage, not on television, but I played him for 2 scenes in a stage pantomime when the original inhabitant of Humphrey, who would be on for like an hour, got a bit tired, and he would leave the stage, and then I would come on in a suit that was 20 years older.
Really?
So he was about 5'4", and I, at the age of 15, was 6'2". So he would leave at 5'4", Humphrey, and then he'd come in on the other side of the stage, he'd be 6'2". So I played Humphrey. That was I made that role my own.
This is your stage debut?
No, I'd been around for a while, because all my sisters were ballet dancers, so I was always backstage and always helping with painting sets and things like that. So I sort of came onto the stage through the back, which is sort of how I got onto TV, because I was a writer initially, and shouldn't ever really have been in front of the camera. It was just something that sort of happened gradually. Well,
we'll get to that, but I want to talk about these stage shows, because if you ever print out your CV, there's just this long list of stage shows from Adelaide.
Yeah, all from Adelaide.
In the 1980s?
A lot of university stuff. You know, the stuff of Humphrey and the kids' shows, that was all 70s. But then when I went to university, I was in University Review.
They always have terrible names. Tell me you've been in one with
Sure. Well, they were law reviews.
A shocking pun, surely.
No, well, I don't know whether it was shocking. Subpoena Hard Day's Night.
Okay.
It's a fine name. Barristar Galactic.
Oh, no!
These are perfectly serviceable names. But, you know, generally it was a really... The audience was... An audience is the best way to edit your material if you're writing. And we were writing our own stuff and performing our own stuff. And I remember there was a review once. We'd just love being reviewed, and we'd, on the opening, second night usually, to come out that night, and we'd go around to the offices of the Adelaide Advertiser or the Sunday Mail, and we'd hang around until they were dumped onto the back of the truck. You know, there's no internet in those days. You couldn't sort of just call it up. And we'd buy one and we'd read through it. And I remember one of them said, Shaun Micallef appears just in time to save rotting sketches. So it was a backhanded comment, because it said, well, he's a good performer, but I had written a lot of material I was in, so clearly my writing was
rotten,
was terrible. Or at least it was, in relative terms, not as well. My acting wasn't as horrible as my writing.
But what exactly were you trying to do in those shows?
Well, I don't know whether we had a brief. We didn't really set ourselves any particular goal, apart from the fact we had 2 weeks to write and rehearse and put on a show that ran for a week, usually. So there was some topical stuff in there, and usually, I mean, very Adelaide-centric. It would just be bamboozling to see the show if you came from anywhere outside of Adelaide. It was usually about how boring Adelaide was.
Right.
It lived a very, comfortable sort of lower middle class sort of life, and getting to university was easy. That wasn't difficult for me to get in, and doing the law course wasn't hard. That was fine. Got out, got a job. That was easy. Doing the job wasn't difficult.
No.
Nothing really ever happened. There was no challenge.
No obstacles too.
No, there was no obstacles. I've been lucky that way. I mean, everything that I've wanted to do has sort of happened.
Right.
Even when I decided to give up that job and come to Melbourne and be a writer. That sort of happened because Gary McCaffrie, who I went to university with and who I wrote with, have written with for many years, he just said, yeah, sure, come over, we'll get you a job. It was just like, it was very easy.
He's a terrific talent, and I should point out he's actually directing this episode of the show.
I think
Vlad, can you just get a shot of him? He's sitting over there.
But although I must say that when I came over because I came over to write for a show called Full Frontal, which was on Channel 7, and I thought, this is going to be easy. So I wrote 20 scripts which were based largely on what I used to write for the stage. None of them were accepted. They were all rejected.
Really?
It was very demoralising. I thought I was going to be quite good at it, and I wasn't very good at it at all. And they'd sort of sent Gary over. I know why. They sent him over to talk to me, basically. Not to address it directly, but to sort of help me write for TV. This is very different writing for TV as opposed to writing for stage. It's just so much shorter. You've got to be much sharper and actually write jokes. And I'd never written jokes before.
But hang on, did you used to write the pate biscuit monologues for Glyn Nicholas on The Big Gig?
Yeah.
Is that right?
I did do that, yeah. I did. In fact, I performed that role on stage myself before.
You were Pate Biscuit?
Before, yeah, not by that name, but it was basically that, which is, in fact, it's Auntie Rotter. It's a Peter Sellers sketch from a long time ago, and it's basically that. So, yes, I dressed up in a wig and basically performed that character. And Glyn made it his own and did it on The Big Gig, and I used to, this is in the days before email and even faxes, I used to write the scripts out by longhand and put them in the post, and then watch the next week to see whether whether it would be performed and whether my name would scoot past at the end, which it sometimes did when it was included, often misspelled.
Of course, to this day, it's still misspelled.
Yes, that's right.
Hopefully at the end of this show.
Would you?
We'll slip one in.
Put 3 Fs on the end.
We'll do that. Okay, so you've come over to do Full Frontal. Were you one of the producers of that show for a while?
Yeah. Well, I basically gave myself the job acting.
Right.
Gary McCaffrie, who we can cut to just again. Can we just cut?
Yeah, can we have another shot?
In fact, I would suggest that as an editing technique for any of the future interviews, you just cut to Gary. He's sort of like the cat in the window, really. Well, Gary and I were asked to produce the series called Full Frontal, and that was mainly because the producers who were producing it were off doing something called, Gary, what was it called?
The wedding one.
Yeah.
Wedlocked.
Thank you, Tony. It was called Wedlocked. They did Wedlocked, and that didn't do so well. So after about 3 episodes, they sort of came back and just gradually just pushed us out again. But in that time, we had managed to reduce the popularity of the show by several ratings points.
Really?
We changed it completely. We put different music on at the beginning, and I'd given myself a role. So we completely abused any notion of responsible producing, and it just basically did what we wanted to do. And effectively, that's how I got in as an actor, was really just giving myself a break.
The one I love was Roger Explosion. What was the idea behind that?
Well, David McGann was a character I played, and he was initially started off, and this is the first role I gave myself as being some on-the-spot reporter. So there was always 30 seconds of every news sketch that we would do would have a throw to him, and he wouldn't do it properly, and that was supposed to be amusing. And then eventually he would be hosting his own nature documentaries, which weren't very good, and we ended up exploring all the ways you could not do those things properly, and then we started playing with the sets, putting the set on the back or moving it on the side, and defying gravity and all that. We thought that was amusing, and then we ran out of ideas, and we thought, why don't we play a failed, just like Hunter, a series called Hunter starring Tony Ward, which I think was made by Crawford's.
Rod Mulliner was heavily involved.
That's right. Yes, I think he might have replaced Tony Ward at one point. So we did that. So it was bad acting and bad, basically. All the sets were the same set. It would just be redressed, and we managed to get a few sketches out of that, and then it's a character we took over to the ABC and gave him I think it was a hospital drama.
Yes, that's right, Dr. Miracle.
And then a legal drama as well. And I remember Gary, who was co-producing the McCaffrie program on the ABC, he didn't like David McGann very much. I mean, and effectively after 4 years of him, he was pretty sick of him, and in retrospect, I can perfectly understand why. So I didn't tell him that we were shooting these things that I'd written, and we'd built a huge set. I mean, when's the last time in a sketch show you would build a set? This was a massive set. It was like West Wing. It had a corridor that went round and round. It was massive, and Gary just walked in and had a look around and said, well, what's this for? And
McCann.
I had to, well, I didn't think I told him. I think I just sort of ran off to the canteen.
What I love about the Micallef program is that it's got these two poles, in that there's comedy that is almost Seinfeld-ish, in that everyone can relate to it, like the sketch, for example, about what is a polite distance to leave before opening a door for somebody who's coming in behind you, and it's related directly to how attractive that person is. Now that's an observation anyone can enjoy.
Yes.
But then you'll have the sketch with the job interview where, for no reason at all, people just keeps firing off a toy dinosaur.
Yeah,
you know the one I'm talking about?
Godzilla, yes, that's right. Whenever there's a lull in the conversation,
that's mystifying.
he would just press the button on the Godzilla, who would roar, and then he would be able to answer the question. Yeah, why is that difficult for you to understand? Why?
But you were able to create a framework where those two styles could coexist.
Well, we, as I said, I mean, the real motivation behind the style of the show was to accommodate all this material that we had that didn't relate to anything. So we needed a show, a hub from which we could attract all this other stuff. So we had our variety show, which we used to, Gary'd come over to my place and we would watch In Melbourne Tonight, starring Frankie J. Holden.
Oh, yes.
And we would just note down all the conventions and all the things that didn't go right for him.
Right.
And God bless him, because that was essentially what fed into all those interviews and all those things. And then we had a sketch show that seemed to run parallel to it, but we didn't really refer to it, at least in the early days. We didn't actually refer to it being a sketch show. It was just, you know, when we got sick of being in the studio, we just came to outside. It wasn't necessarily connected with anything.
But I remember it just gained momentum, that show, and I always remember there was a sketch in the second series where I really felt you'd hit some kind of new tone. It was where Ros Hammond played your girlfriend.
Yes.
And she was very sexually frank.
Yes, her name was Gigi Rossetti.
Yeah, that's
my girlfriend.
right.
That's right.
And I remember thinking that you incorporated your own reserve and embarrassment into that, and it was a great moment.
Yeah, it was odd because I thought, what sort of character am I going to play to hold this thing together?
Yeah.
Because we considered playing David McGann, but Gary, couldn't stand.
That's what I hear.
So we thought, well, I'll just give him my name, and I'll basically be David McGann if I need to be, and I'll be. We had another character called Philip Quist, which we used to use on Full Frontal, who was a drama, who was a critic, I think, and he was forced to cover football match conversations down in the change room. So he was very, plummy and correcting the grammar of the football players. So we sort of smashed those two characters together, even though they cancelled each other out many times. And that was the character called, Shaun Micallef. That was it, which caused us all sorts of trouble when we went to Channel 9 to do a real variety show.
Well, that's right, because I remember that now Shaun Micallef is a real person, and he's having to interact with real guests.
But he wasn't really me. He was just this sort of construct that we could support with the writing. But once with the writing, sometimes the writing had to go away for an interview to take place. And I was just confused, and I just didn't know what I was doing. So I'd be trying to conduct a normal interview, but I'd be thinking. I kept drifting off and thinking, talking to Barry Humphries, who I revere. I'm talking to him, and it's so wonderful to talk to Barry. And then I'm suddenly realising I'm thinking about this sketch that's coming in after segment 3, and that's right. And Barry's looking at me like he's asked me something, and I have no idea what he's just said. And this is a live 2-hour show. So,
can I ask about that? Was your original intention with the Channel 9 show with Micallef Tonight to interview real people? Was that your idea?
No, it wasn't. Well, no, it wasn't really my idea to do it. I was just offered the opportunity to do a variety, like a chat show, a variety show they called it. And it seemed like it. I thought, well, I haven't really done that before. That's a good enough reason to do it. So I tend to sort of say yes to things. I realised only afterwards that they thought the Micallef program on the ABC, Channel 9 thought the Micallef program on the ABC was a real chat show.
Right.
They hadn't seen it, but they'd heard about it, and they looked at it from the distance with the sound down. It goes, he's done this show before. That's fine. That's
he seems to have Francis Greenslade on a lot.
That's right. Yeah, that guy with the beard there looked a bit familiar. That's fine. He knows what he's doing. And it was only in the couple of weeks leading up to it that I'd confessed that I'd never interviewed anybody in my life
Okay, so you've gone through this thing that's been going on for like 15 years now, being the fake Shaun Micallef and the real Shaun Micallef, and then you seem to have, with your apostrophe-ridden show on Channel 10, have achieved some kind of balance between the real and the fake, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I guess it's fallen away, I suppose, the various need to and also less need to write as well. And I think that's probably from radio, because I did a little bit of radio.
Yeah, that's right.
After that show finished on Channel 9, there was a period in the wilderness where, you know, I just didn't know what I wanted to do and whether anybody wanted me for anything. And it was a pretty public failure. But I went on stage again, and which I hadn't done for many years, and I realised that, you know, that connection with the audience was still there, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. And the next gig I was offered was on radio, which was breakfast radio, and as a result of doing that, I realised you can't write everything. You cannot write everything.
No.
You've got to be yourself at some point.
That's right.
So I ended up lowering my guard a bit and allowing the risk of not being liked by an audience, which I think was my great fear. Because the thing that motivates a lot of performers, I think, is and you know, you've heard this a number of times, I'm sure, Tony, in this interview, is this desire to be endorsed in some way and liked.
Sure.
That was what we did in our home. We used to tell jokes as a way of showing affection. It was just the way. So it's a very warming thing to do. So to have an audience not laugh at your joke is one thing, but then to have an audience not like you is terrifying.
Yes.
So you do the best you can to present the best possible face to the audience. That was how I grew up, and that's how I grew up performing, I suppose. So to actually sit on air in front of a microphone, and there's nowhere to hide, as you know.
And
there's nowhere to hide.
3 hours a day.
3 hours a day, and eventually you are just being yourself, and you're hoping for the best. And insofar as you can tell on radio, because it's not a live audience, it was working okay. You know, it was what it was. At the same time, I was asked to do Thank God You're Here.
Yeah, and I remember you were very worried about that.
Oh,
you weren't sure whether you should be doing that.
No, well, it was... if I'd been asked and I hadn't been doing radio, I would have said no, because it would just terrify me. Because I used to be asked to be on the panel, and it used to scare me to death. And I remember hosting it one night when Tom wasn't there, Tom Gleisner wasn't there, and I embarrassed myself terribly, and I ran away at the end of it.
Right.
They all rang. I said, "Where's Shaun gone? Where's he gone?" Yeah, it was awful. It was terrible. Beat myself up. And I didn't want to do that, but I had relaxed a little bit, so I said, great chance to get back on television, thank God you're here, I'll do it. And it worked okay, and you know what it's like. It's very frightening, but you have an excuse because you're not told anything, so it's almost got a built-in apology if it doesn't work.
That's right.
But I relaxed a bit, and I think through the radio and that show prepared me in a strange sort of way for the one I'm doing now, which is at my most unguarded.
Well, what I love about it is you are essentially playing yourself, but you can still enter by kicking a couple of garbage cans down a staircase.
Yeah.
You can still slip in a reference to Chester Conklin if you want to.
Yes, jokes for no one.
How was it, though, performing someone else's material when you did that show of Peter Cook and Dudley Moore sketches?
Well,
did it feel constraining?
It felt... Well, I felt a reverence for the material. I know when we started doing it, the whole point was because the material is so good, and I wanted to perform in front of an audience, and again, because it's been a few years, and I thought, well, what better? I mean, I tried a show called Boeing, which was a farce, which didn't do that well. This is one of the run of many things that hadn't worked, and it didn't suit me, I don't think, and it didn't quite work. And I thought, well, I'm better off doing sketches, because that's what that's my upbringing. You know, that's what I do best. Where are the best sketches? What are they? Has to be Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. Just the most wonderful sketches. And it was great, but I did defer to the material. Of course you would, in the early stages. And then when we got more and more comfortable with it, I actually realised that a lot of the material that they did was born of ad-libbing around another line. You know, you could feel... You'd look at the transcript of the script, and it was a transcript of the performance rather than a script, and you go, well, these lines must have been in the original script, and I could feel where something had grown from that. And then, so the idea is, it's almost as though some of the script is in bold, and then the ad-libs, or what started off as originally ad-libs, are in italics, and you have to give them a different emphasis when you perform it. You can't come out and sell everything the same way because it doesn't feel right. You know, it feels a bit second-hand. So Stephen Curry, who was performing pretty much the Dudley Moore roles, and I was performing pretty much the Peter Cook roles, we ended up imbuing all those ad-libs with that same loose feel to it, and it worked really well. It was a very interesting exercise. Not quite as, I didn't get quite the kick out of it as I would have if it was my own material, because I was doing it for somebody else. You know, I was sort of doing it for Cook and Moore fans, and doing it for Cook and Moore, and I wanted to do it right. So I used to beat myself up a bit when it hadn't quite worked. But it did teach me about performing on stage, because the mistake I'd been making was to go out there and try and get that same intensity of laugh that I got the previous night with that line, with that particular line. And if you go for it, you know, if you go and try and get that again,
to repeat it precisely.
If you try, it's impossible, because the audience is first of all made up of people who are very different from the people who were there the previous night. They also can sense, I reckon, that you're slightly confident about this line that's coming up. And then you're sort of not giving it the same flip that you gave it the previous night, and they don't laugh as much. And then that threw me, and I thought, oh, that throws you, and then you suddenly go into a little bit of a funk, and then want to try and chase them down and get the next laugh out of them. But I realise that's absolutely pointless doing that. The whole point of it is, and it's why it's so gloriously different from television, is that it has to be different every night. And they give you, well, you give them permission to laugh. You know, you're not making them laugh. You're just allowing them to laugh. Really, it's their decision to laugh. You're not making them do anything. And that's a real kick. You know, that's something you don't get on TV or film. And I'll keep doing it. I'll do it every couple of years. And I think the next step for me would probably be to write a show of my own and do that. And I'll probably try and do that in a couple of years.
You have 3 sons.
Yes.
You're basically Fred McMurray.
Yes.
I've been fascinated for years by the kind of, I don't want to use the word regime, but you've kind of been subjecting your kids to great comedy, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. But I didn't want to. One of the joys of my father is not a man who laughs too readily, but he did take me to see Jacques Tati films, and he would we had a little cinema that wasn't far away, and when there'd be some like Charlie Chaplin film on, The Great Dictator would be on, he says, oh, you should come and have a look at this. He loved films, so we would go together and we would share that experience, and it was very gentle, and I never got the feeling that he was forcing me to watch these things. And I loved comedy anyway. So with my own children, I didn't want to say, hey, watch this. It's, you know, you must watch this, because they'll turn off it and they just won't be interested at all. In it. So very slowly, what did we watch first? I think we started watching Laurel and Hardy.
Really?
Yeah, and then we moved on to just the shorts, and then we moved on to Chaplin's shorts, and they love Charlie Chaplin. And then we moved into Buster Keaton, and I've actually got a box set of Harold Lloyd.
Oh, Harold Lloyd.
Lloyd, yes.
Lloyd was bigger than Keaton and Chaplin in his day.
Very, and hard to come by these days. So they have an education in silent film comedy that I don't think is very common amongst children who are 13, 10 and 8.
And they're watching Family Guy, I think.
Yeah, well, no, we refuse to allow them to watch Family Guy. So they'll go to school and they'll be entertaining their friends and sharing stories of Harold Lloyd's exploits, hanging from a clock in safety last, and then presumably they'll be beaten by their friends. Yeah,
but they'll be wearing spats, and they'll be looking good.
Yeah, but you know, that's the stuff from which all the other stuff comes. So that's the right order to see it. And also there's a grace and there's a beauty and there is an art to the silent film comedies that I'm speaking of that maybe isn't there now. There's a sort of an abandon, joyful abandon in a lot of comedies now, but it's usually about chaos and mess and awkwardness, and not about grace. And that's, you won't see it now. You know, you might see Jim Carrey do a really good fall, and there is grace in that, but it's not quite as graceful as seeing Chaplin on a pair of roller skates, skating backwards and almost falling off a precipice. I mean, that's just astonishing.
And what do your kids think of your own gear?
Well, that was one of the reasons for doing Talking About Your Generation, because they hadn't actually seen anything. They have seen some things on YouTube. They'd seen some Milo Kerrigan on YouTube.
Right.
Sort of quite liked
It'd be
it.
quite confronting.
Yeah. But, and you know, that's nice they can see that, because I certainly can't do it now because I'm just
Right.
too old to do those sorts of falls
I know.
anymore. And I was never a graceful physical performer. I love physical comedy, and I really do love it, but I was never really any good at it. I could fall over awkwardly and make it look funny, but I could never skate backwards on a pair of roller skates.
Well, we won't make you do it
Okay.
for this show.
Sure.
Shaun, so many projects we didn't even have time to get to. Thanks for doing this,
That's all right, it's a pleasure.
and we'll see you again in 6 months for a checkup.
All right, fine. I'll be there. Thank you, Doctor.
Yes. Oh,
So we
man.
end on Gary? We roll the titles, closing titles over Gary?